Welcome back. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about the color class and how to use it to create color objects. And you might be saying, well, I actually already know how to create colors. I can either use the setStyle method, or I can just say my object dot set color, and then I would just say color in all caps dot the color I'd like. However, that's not perfect, because in theory, you actually want to be able to create a color of any type. The colors that were provided here, there's quite a few of them, but let's say you had a very specific type of color you needed to create. The only way to do this would be to use a color object. The color object is defined in the JavaFX .scene.paint.color class, and it allows us a lot of functionality. It basically allows us to create a color object for a certain red, green, blue, and opacity, and then you can have a range from 0 to 255 for the color values. Now, this is one of the most important things in design. To be able to create your own color allows you a lot more flexibility, since you can allow the user to specify what type of color they'd like. So let's try this out. So the color class actually has 4 data fields. These are the red, green, blue, and opacity. These are obviously going to be private, but we can access them using the getter methods. These getter methods actually aren't too useful, since the color class is actually immutable. Hopefully you recall that this means that once a color object is created, it cannot be modified. The way we would, in theory, modify a color object is we return a new color object with the specified values, just like we did for strings. So, let's try this out. Let's say we want to create a specific color object with the specified red, green, blue, and opacity values. The way to do this would be to just say, let's say we want this to be a color object color. We would say color, and then our object reference variable, color, is equal to a new color, and hopefully you recall that we actually don't have to import anything in this case, since by importing the java.scene.paint.color class previously, because we've imported that, we don't have to re-import it. So, once we have this, we can now create our color object. The values can range from 0 to 1 for all of these types. So you could say, let's say we want a color object, and we want this color object to have the values of 0.25, 0.14, 0.333, and 0.51. Now the way this works is, there's a public constructor with the double R, double G, double B, and double opacity. This corresponds to red is 0.25, 0.14 is blue, or green, 0.333 is blue, and 0.51 is the opacity. Opacity increases from 0 to 1, so that 0 is a transparent color, and 1 is a completely dark or completely impermeable color. And this is in general called the RGB A model, where it's called because it has red, green, blue, and alpha, where alpha stands for your opacity. There are also some other, this is the only constructor, but there are some other methods we should talk about. There is the brighter method. The brighter method, and remember that all of these methods, since the color class is immutable, all of these are value returning methods. They'll return a new color object that's brighter or darker. So, let's say we want to make this color object slightly brighter. The way we would do this is by increasing the value of everything so that it becomes a lighter color. So, we would say we want color 2 to be equal to, let's say we want the old color, so color.brighter. And you'll see you have all of these methods right here. You can use these methods such as saturate or darken, and these methods are always useful since they can return a new color object that has the specified values. This will make color 2 a darker color than color 1. But let's say we want to revert back. To do that, you have the darker method. You could say, color class, of course, and then let's say we want to call this color object color 3 is equal to color 2 dot darker. And with that, we've now created a new darker color object, and we've returned that to the color 3 object reference variable. After that, we can then use the methods that are kind of like constructors. This is a very unique thing to the color class, and it's because the color class is immutable. So whenever you wanted to return a new color, you would have to either use the constructor, or you can use one of these methods which creates a new specific type of color with some values. So the way to do that is, let's say we want to create a color, and we'll call this color 4, and that would be equal to color 3 dot color, and this is all lowercase. This method itself is overloaded twice. First, it allows you to, with the specified red, green, and blue, it creates a specific opaque color with the red, green, and blue. However, remember, it's opaque, so this immediately will have the opacity of 1, meaning it's as thick as can be. In addition, before we go any further, I'd like to mention that this is the sRGB color spectrum, in case you're wondering. So we would specify a red, green, and blue value. In our case, let's say we want to create a red value of, for example, 0.33, a green value of 0.55, and a blue value of, let's say, 0.879. Now all of these are perfectly valid since they're all less than 1, and with that we've now created a new color 4 object. This is functionally a constructor, but we use it this way just so that we have a method, since that way we know we're calling it based on a specific instance. In addition, all of these are static methods. So while we can't say color3.color 0.33, 0.55, 0.879, you can actually just say color the class. And in fact, we should do this since we're calling static methods. So a static method should always be called using its class. In addition, you can also create using this method, you can create a new color object with the specified opacity as well. So you just add another comma and then provide your opacity. Let's say 0.654. And this is, again, very, very similar to a constructor. However, we use these methods if we already have for whatever reason, need to use a method instead of a normal constructor. And finally, we have the RGB method, which is overloaded and again creates a new RGB color object, except this time, instead of taking decimal values for the red, green, and blue, and opacity, it'll take numeric values ranging from 0 to 255. So you would enter these by saying, let's say, color 5 is equal to a color.rgb, and then we provide integer values this time. So instead of saying 0.33, you could say 56, and instead of saying 0.55, we could provide 177. This ranges from 0 to 255. This is another very well-known color method. And then you can say for our blue, let's say we want that to be 57. And then this is overloaded so that it can also take an opacity that is overloaded with 0 to 255. So let's say we want the opacity to be 254. And with that, we can now actually try and use these colors we've created to implement them with our circle. We can use these just like we did for the others. Instead of, you could use it right here inside a set style. However, or inside the set style method, you could use it in CSS. However, for our case, we're going to use it by saying circle.setColor, since we are only setFill, since we only want to change the fill status or fill color of our circle, nothing else, so we can use the specific method to make it more readable. And then we provide a color object. In our case, let's say we pick color 3. And now if we run our program, you'll notice that it'll create 3 Now this method is actually overridden so that you can provide an opacity, but remember that the opacity actually is going to need to be a decimal. The opacity cannot be ranged from 0 to 255, it still has to be from 0 to 1. So we could just provide the opacity as 0.99. Now we're going to actually try and make use of all of these color objects we've created, and let's say we want to change the fill status of our circle to one of these color objects. All we'd have to do is say circle, our circle object of course, dot set fill, and then we provide our color object that we're working with. In our case, let's say we want to work with color 5. And now if we run our program, you can see that we're going to get a circle that still has its black from before, but this time, because we changed the values of its RGB spectrum, we're going to have a specific type of circle, and it's going to be of the color type that we specified. So if you want to change this to, let's say, a different, very specific type of color, all you'd have to do is change those RGB values. You can actually see this. Now it's important to make sure that you actually get rid of your set style, because if you have a CSS if you have a CSS style there, it'll always take precedence over any of these set fill methods. So for our color to work properly, we have to make sure we alter the set fill. We have to make sure we get rid of our CSS, JavaFX CSS notation, otherwise it won't work. So we're going to run our program, and this time you'll notice that because of the way we specified our circle object, and if we look back, you'll notice we modified the values so that it changes to a very specific type, and therefore you can always change these numbers so that you get a different type of color. And this is a huge amount of granular control. So if you want it to be a very, very specific type of color, you can specify that using those specific numbers. Now the only reason we would use something like this is if we wanted a very, very specific type of color. Almost all of the normal colors we'll use, and this is why this is considered to be an additional class, we won't use it too often, are going to be included by default in the color.color name. So instead of saying if you knew you just needed a green, you could instead of creating a new color object and then specifying that and then adding that to the set fill, you could just say color dot, for example, azure. And therefore, if you do this, you can then use CSS on these colors that are by default created. So if you have a choice, you should always use the constants defined in the color class, but if you need a very specific type of color, nothing can beat the color class's degree of granular control. Hopefully you found this lesson useful, and hopefully you're able to use the color class in your own programs. To summarize, we just talked about the constructors and how to create specific color class objects today.